Hey, the awesome facility management community. Welcome back to yet another episode of the FM Times podcast. For the last 3 weeks, I was doing extensive travel to UK and to Dubai. So it feels absolutely amazing to be back in the studios to be recording the podcast. And this podcast is kind of inspired by a work that I was intending to do almost a year back, but that actually got fresh from the visits that I did recently, the meetings that I had, and some of the on ground observations I saw about the readiness of facility management companies to take on performance based or output based contracts and digital transformation in general. So in this podcast, we are really going to talk about some of the aspects that I think could go into a model, the one that we've developed for facility management companies and leaders to understand how ready they are to be able to take on what's going to be important in the future, and covering different aspects, not just the technology aspect. So I think let's dive into this slightly in detail, because what we're seeing is sooner or later you're going to have performance based contracts come in. We've already started to see in some of the regions like Middle East and in the UK a lot of emphasis being given on technology by the side of the customer, the client side, and now that's going to transcend into one way or the other into contracts which go beyond the normal innovation KPI kind of a model that everyone was having initially in the contracts. And what's important for FM companies and leaders to understand is that from the current state of how you are managing your contracts to get to being able to manage the output based contracts or performance based contracts is not going to be happening overnight. There is a lot of process that needs to go through. There's a lot of changes that need to happen. And again, as I said, the cost of being repetitive, it's not going to happen overnight. And one needs to understand whether they are really ready for that change, how ready you are, and also placing yourself in comparison to where the peer group is. And that is something that's immensely important. Now, unfortunately, such a model or a score is not available, but we've used our experience of conversations interacting with over 30 to 40 FM companies across multiple regions, put together what we've seen as a form of a model for you to understand your readiness. And we're looking at 5 to 6 critical factors in which you could ultimately decide whether you're ready or not. The number one is the customer readiness, which means the kind of customers that you are catering to or currently servicing. Are they ready, or is your contracts with them or the provision with them allows you to move into performance based contracts, which means largely talking about how are your SLAs structured, how are the KPIs being monitored, how do you engage on that, what sort of a customer interaction do you have? I mean, is your customer interaction a typical day in the life of a facility manager? Is that mostly firefighting, or there's significant room for strategic innovation? So those aspects would contribute for you to find out a score, whether you, from the customer readiness perspective, is that high, low, where exactly it is. So those are some of the important things that we look at. And in the SLAs, we look at what's the level of data transparency that's currently available. That's the number one thing, which kind of is missing in a lot of contracts, but that's something that's eventually going to change. So that's one factor, customer readiness. The second is transformation readiness. How ready is your business, is your team to transform, which is fundamental question, which means how many initiatives have you taken in the past, which means, what sort of innovation programs or projects have run in the past, across what percentage of your portfolio? How many have then, out of those initiatives, have gone on to become full-scale implementations? And how involved were your customers, or how engaged were your customers while you were doing this? All of this really decides whether your organization is transformation ready. The third aspect is human resource readiness, which means, are your people ready? And again, when we say people, we're largely focusing around the blue collar workforce, or let's say the technicians and O&M technicians who work on the on the site, at the site, doing things that they're supposed to be doing. Is what percentage of your technicians are actually very comfortable using smartphones? majority of them would be, but we still see a lot of facilities where the usage of smartphones is very limited. In some of the countries, obviously, people end up using tablets for normal the work orders and all of that. But in some of the places, you're still using standoff smartphones. So it really depends on all of that as well. And from the engineering perspective, one wants to look at what percent of your engineering team has basic data skills. That is a very important parameter to look at, and both of them really combined would demonstrate the readiness of the teams, the human resource, which is the most important aspect of facilities management. The fourth aspect being operational readiness, which means have you in your existing contracts try to make specific changes in your operations, provided you had the room to do so, which would mean what percentage of, let's say, non-critical assets or overall assets have actually been put under a non-PPM schedule? Have they? I mean, if they haven't been, then that's one of the things which will sort of further elongate your journey on the overall transformation. How's the central knowledge transferred to site? Which means if you have your central command control center or nerve center, how's that actually going to on-site? And more importantly, how's the feedback actually happening from on-site to the central team? I think which is fundamentally very important, which really is a function of whether you have been able to a certain degree, build institutional knowledge, or it is still individual knowledge, which is there. The fifth being the funding readiness, which means how ready you are to fund those, fund innovation or initiatives. I mean, which typically would come from the perspective of how does your leadership look at funding that? Where are you looking to source the money from? Is it customers? Is it your own P&L? Is it strategic initiative? You have a corpus for innovation? I mean, there are different things, but depending upon what you're doing, really makes it more easy to figure out how ready is the leadership in this particular context more than the organization to really go for the transformation. And the second is how much of a weightage do you give to your ROI, which is again top to bottom, and it's largely more at the top of the organization. How much focus do you give to ROI when you're really doing the initiatives early on? And that makes a lot of an impact in terms of the overall outlook of how you're looking at this. The last is strategic readiness, which means how do you source innovation? Are you building it? Are you buying it plainly? It's a combination. Have you in the past made strategic partnership with startups, or are you considering investments in them? All of them put together really help understand whether you are strategically ready, because one needs to understand that you are that's one aspect is to get to the transform state, but the other is to be staying ahead. And when you look at drawing a parallel to the three horizons innovation model, you would have to have Horizon 1, Horizon 2, and Horizon 3 innovations all happening at different points in time. So it's really important to be strategically ready to get to the end state and to actually stay there for a lot of time. So these are the 5 to 6 indexes that we look at: customer readiness, transformation readiness, human resources readiness, operational readiness, funding readiness, and strategic readiness. All 6 combined give you a score to help you understand where your organization is in relation to where your peer group is. And the good thing is the model is up. You will get a link in the comments to a Google form where you could go put your data, and we would be able to give you back a detailed outlook of where you are in context to your peer group. And if that gets you thinking, if you want to talk more, our team would be more than happy to speak to you and dive into details. But irrespective, I wholeheartedly encourage FM leaders to think about these aspects and perhaps more to be able to ascertain whether you're ready for the transformation, which is inevitable. And more importantly, to really understand where you are in the journey, how far you have to go. You may as well have started that journey, and perhaps most of the emerging or leading FM companies are in that journey. But what matters in today's context is where you are in that journey, given the kind of time frame that we are looking at. And this assessment will help you really sort of plan your next journey in that journey, overall journey really better. And And in case if you think there are other attributes that one needs to look at to determine the readiness, please do let us know. We would love to hear from you and further consolidate on the model. Once again, hope that you like this podcast. And in case if you do, please rate us, leave us a review wherever you are listening to our podcast. And more importantly, if there's any suggestion for us to help us improve the content purely from the relevance of facilities management, digital transformation, and how it can all help the community to make better decisions, we're all ears. Thank you so much.